I'm going to ask you a question. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the Nazca lines? And it's probably the lines themselves. You probably don't think much about the people that actually created them or why they actually created the lines. What are the Nazca lines? Simply enough, they're really large dwellings in the Peruvian desert, and we don't know the purpose of them. They were created between 500 BCE and 500 CE. But did you know that there was two distinct cultures that actually created these lines? The Paracas were actually the first ones to create any of the lines, and the most well-known is the trident. But when the Nazca took over, they took it to a whole new level. The Paracas and the Nazca only lived alongside each other for about 100 years. The Nazca lines encompass an area of about 500 square kilometers. There's about 1,200 of these Nazca lines. They range from straight lines to spirals to animal shapes to shapes of us. But one of the interesting parts about it is that they didn't really care for their own lines. And that's to say that they would actually cover up a lot of their own lines with other artwork. How did they manage to create these almost 1,200 geoglyphs? Well, first, a lot of manpower. Second, the process is actually quite simple. They just remove the top layer of gravel, exposing the gravel underneath. The top layer has been weathered, the gravel beneath hasn't, so it has a different color. How did they get them so straight? That's still a topic for debate. The working theory right now is a rope and a stick. So you take two sticks, one rope, and you just keep moving it. With our brain's amazing ability to take and fill in blanks and our eye's ability to see curved lines, it wouldn't have been all that difficult for a group of people to actually make these lines. More than likely, there was one group that was just removing the gravel, another group that controlled the sticks, just keep moving the sticks, and the third group just standing at the end of one of the lines and eyeballing to make sure everything was going straight. We call those the foremen. We've all heard theories of why they were created, but there's only a couple theories that are actually credible for why they actually were used. The first is that they were modeled after the stars. So they looked up to the stars, they seen a monkey in the sky, they modeled it down on the ground. In 1967, astrophysicist Gerald Hawkins studied the night sky above the Nazca lines and said that he couldn't find any correlation between what was on the ground and what was in the night sky. I believe this is a dangerous thing. It's a slippery slope to take and judge cultures from the past by what we see to this day. Just because we don't see a monkey in the sky doesn't mean that they didn't see a monkey in the sky. That brings us to the current working theory, that they were created for religious purposes. They were created to take and point to water sources, or they were created to summon water. Either way, they were created to take and help cope with the world that is around them. So developing a practice to take and help cope with the world that you live in, it only makes sense. As I said at the start of the video, we tend to overlook the people that actually created the lines. That brings us to Mark. Mark asked to be 16 years old and just sent back to the time of the Nazca people. This left me with a large area to fill in, so let's get into it. Because the Nazca people didn't have a written language, they didn't leave behind anything for us to really go off of, except for the textiles and pottery. But these only show what they deemed important enough to show. It doesn't show the more mundane aspects of their lives. And this brings us to Mark. I'm going to send Mark back to Ventilla. Ventilla was considered to be the urban capital of the Nazca people. And when I say capital, I don't mean like one governmental system. They were a bunch of chiefdoms that were spread out across an area, and they only came together when it actually served their purposes. Ventilla itself was gorgeous. It sat on irrigated floodplains, and underneath the city, they actually had aqueducts running to cisterns so that during the dry season, they could have water year-round. When we find Mark, what's he doing? He's a traveling salesman. He goes around and trades goods for things that they can't produce themselves. The Nazca people were really good at producing ceramics, but they couldn't produce things like wool. Llamas and alpacas didn't do very well in the climate that they live in. So they trade for this stuff. He also would trade for bird feathers, but not just any bird feathers, tropical bird feathers. Bird feathers from the rainforest. These were used for decorative dressing, and they also used them for headdresses for their dead. But when Mark wasn't trading, he'd be at home farming. A few of the crops they farmed were cotton, sweet potatoes, and peanuts. They did this on terraced platforms where they had floodplains that irrigated the platforms. But the problem with farming in the desert is water. When you don't have enough water, you don't have enough crops. But when water wasn't an issue and the crop harvest was good, Mark and the others would make their way to a place called Cahuachi. Cahuachi for them was a sacred place. This is where they would go and celebrate the amazing crop harvest and thank the divine ones for such a good year. They wouldn't only go there to celebrate crop harvest though. This is also where they took their dead. There are 40 burial mounds that are found at the site. They also buried sacrifices. The sacrifices weren't of enemies of the Nazca though. They were the Nazca themselves. Most of the burials are found at a depth of about 4.5 meters. And they were buried with lavish textiles and ceramics. It didn't matter if you were a male or female, you were all buried the exact same way. Before burying the dead, they would actually mummify the remains. They did this by wrapping the remains in very nice textiles. The graves themselves were designed to be reopened so that more bodies could be put into them. Because of the mummified remains, we can actually see two forms of body modification that they practiced. First was the elongated skull, and second they had tattoos. To get the elongated skull, it was done by either wrapping the head in cloth or wrapping it with boards, and this was done in the first few years of the child's life. Sometime during the 5th century CE, a drought hit. This drought would not let up. As the days became years, Mark and the others started to get desperate. They made their way to Cahuachi to take and try to please the Divine Ones in any way they could, so they started to create an increasing number of geoglyphs during this time period. After nearly a century of droughts, this left the Nazca very weak. The Wari were able to come in and easily conquer them. When they did, the Wari adopted a lot of the artistic traits that the Nazca already were producing. So we start to see this transition from the Nazca to the Wari. The Nazca didn't go away, but they were now part of the Wari. The Nazca and the lines that they created fell into obscurity. It wasn't until the 1920s that we rediscovered the Nazca lines. And ever since then, they have been studied extensively and theories have been abound. Why do the Nazca lines intrigue us so much? I simply think it can be boiled down to, we love a good mystery. We want to know why they were created and what purpose they served. I believe that they probably serve the same purpose that most of our rituals serve throughout our time. It's to take and justify a world that we don't understand. It's to take and help us cope with the events that we can't control. At the end of the day, we're living on a planet that's just trying to kill us. And we've come up with a lot of different creative ways to help justify why we expect this to happen to us. I want to thank you all for watching, and I want to thank the patrons. I do hope you guys take and create something that captures the imagination of future generations.